Time stopped, but the danger didn't. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I am your host, Enigma. Your comments make this story even richer. Where are you watching from? Let's tick into the mystery. I was at my desk in the front room on a Tuesday that had already used up its share of small annoyances. Miss Marden on the phone twice about a bill that wasn't ours, a plumber who swore he'd fixed the radiators last winter and then whistled like a broke clarinet when I asked why they still sighed, and Fritz humming something mournful over a saucepan big enough to drown a dachshund in. All that was background noise to the real fact of life in the brownstone. If it was a Tuesday and the weather didn't look like it was trying to kill the orchids, Nero Wolfe was in a good mood until proven otherwise. Good mood for Wolfe, meaning he had not yet found a cause to say, "Pfee." That is a blessing you don't waste. At 10:15 I heard the elevator grate, the click of the inner door, and the soft, irreverent tread of Theodore Horstman in the hall. Only it wasn't Horstman, it was the doorbell. The doorbell in Wolfe's house is a kind of moral test. It asks, very plainly, who is about to walk in and try to disturb the only man in New York who still thinks dining is a sacrament, and that standing up is optional. Most of the time, the test is failed by someone with a grievance, a bill, or an imagination. Once in a while, it's a client, and on rare days, it's a client who will cause a new scratch in the furniture of my existence. I opened the door and found a woman framed by the morning light and a November wind that had teeth. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, wearing a dark coat that had seen some money and a hat that had not. Her face was one of those you can't call pretty without qualification and can't call plain without lying. The eyes did the work, gray and steady and too tired for her age. She said, "Good morning. I need to see Mr. Wolfe. It's important." I've heard the word important from gamblers, opera singers, and a man who had lost his pet ferret. I let the word pass me like a taxi that isn't mine. "Have you an appointment, ma'am?" "No, but—" She tightened her mouth as if it was holding back a speech. "Tell him it concerns a clock." Now we were getting somewhere, because a clock is not something you bring up unless it's either priceless, pointless, or about to stop a murder. The last two are the ones that arrive unannounced. "Name?" "Clara Vane." "Come in, Miss Vane." I took her coat and hat, hung them, and led her to the office. Wolfe was in his red leather chair behind the desk, a book open in his lap with a forefinger tucked like a bookmark. He's a big man, even sitting down, and he was sitting down as nature intended. He looked up with the mild irritation of a bishop interrupted during a sermon. "Archie," he said, "this is Miss Clara Vane. She says her business concerns a clock." Wolfe's eyebrows rose a millimeter. For him, that counts as a startle. "A clock," he repeated. "Good morning, Miss Vane. Sit down." She sat in the red chair opposite his desk. I took my own chair to the right, where I can watch Wolfe and any human being he's about to dissect with language. Wolfe said nothing for a full 10 seconds, a little habit that drives clients either to confession or to the door. Miss Vane stayed put. "Now," Wolfe said at last, "you have come without appointment. You are therefore either desperate or discourteous. Which?" "Desperate," she said quickly. Then, with a faint, grim smile, "I hope not discourteous. I do not mind discourtesy when it is honest. I mind melodrama." Wolfe shut the book on his lap and set it aside. "Proceed." Miss Vane opened her handbag, took out a slim, rectangular object wrapped in brown paper, and held it with both hands the way you'd hold a wounded bird. She started to say something, stopped, and looked at me. Wolfe said, "Archie Goodwin is my associate. You will speak freely." She nodded and put the object on the edge of the desk. "This is a clock." "Yes," Wolfe said, indulgent, as if she'd told him water was wet. She slid the paper off. It was a mantel clock, black mahogany, polished like it had been on display instead of in use, with a brass face and Roman numerals. There was nothing gaudy about it, nothing antique enough to make your eyes rub. But there was one detail that pulled attention like a hook in the lip, a neat spiderweb crack in the glass over the face, centered exactly above the 6, like a small starburst frozen in time. "It's handsome," I said, because silence was starting to smell like humidity. "But I've seen prettier." She ignored me as if I were a radio playing in another room. "This clock stopped at 9:47 last Friday night." Wolfe's gaze moved from her to the clock to her again. "Many clocks stop. They are machines. Not this one." She took a breath that was more like swallowing a stone. "This one stops when someone is going to die. If you want to know how a man like Wolfe reacts to improbable statements, watch his eyelids." They lowered, very slightly. Not in skepticism, but in caution. The thing about Wolfe is he doesn't waste disbelief. He files it. "Do you believe that?" he asked. "I don't know what I believe anymore. I know what I've seen." She placed her palms flat on her knees, white knuckles showing through her gloves. It happened twice before. The clock stopped. Someone died within the hour. "Who?" "My father, 3 years ago. A stroke. The clock stopped at 4:12 in the afternoon. He was dead at 5. Her voice stayed even, but the eyes went dull for a second, like a light behind glass. "Then my husband last year. Car accident. The clock stopped at 11:03 at night. We got the call at 11:30. Wolfe said softly, "Superstition is a powerful narcotic, Miss Vane." "Maybe. But last Friday it stopped again, at 9:47. She leaned forward. "And no one I love died. Not yet. Unless you count love rotten." She looked down at the clock, not touching it. "The person who is going to die is not someone I love. It's someone I fear." I had a quick mental roll call of people I feared. It's a shorter list if you're honest, but it can still take a whole sheet of paper. Wolfe said, "You will do better to name that person than to dramatize your emotions." She hesitated, then said, "Barton Klein." Wolfe's eyes flicked toward me. He didn't say anything, which meant, "Translate." I had Barton Klein in my head already because I read a newspaper now and then. "Real estate developer," I said, "the sort who buys blocks and then sells your childhood back to you as luxury condos." She nodded. "Yes, he's also my employer." "Ah." Wolfe gave that single syllable the weight of a dinner plate. "Continue." "I work for him as executive assistant. I have for 6 years. Until last Friday I thought I knew what kind of man he was. Not good, not kind, but predictable. Then I heard something." She pressed her lips together. "Not in the office, at his house." Wolfe said, "You were at his house on Friday night." "Yes. There was a private dinner. 3 guests. I was there to make sure it went smoothly. Mr. Klein doesn't trust staff he can't control." Her voice tightened on the last word. "After dinner, they went to his study. I was clearing the dining room. I heard shouting, then a thump, like a body hitting furniture." "Did you go to investigate?" "I started to. Then I heard laughter. Not happy laughter. The kind that's used to prove you aren't frightened. One of the guests said, 'You can't do that, not now.' And Mr. Klein said, 'I can do anything I like.'" She swallowed. Then another voice, I didn't recognize it, said, "The clock will tell." Wolfe was still. The only movement in the room was the slow lift of his fingertips to clasp on the desk. Miss Vane's eyes went on. "I went to the kitchen. I told myself it was nothing." She almost laughed, but didn't. "I do that a lot. When I was leaving at 9:30, I passed the mantel in the hall. That's where this clock sits. I glanced at it. It said 9:47. I looked again because I thought I was wrong, but the second hand wasn't moving." "Did you tell anyone?" "No, I took it." She said it flat, like a confession and a challenge. "I put it in my bag and walked out. I don't know why. I suppose because if it's about to predict another death, I didn't want it there to do it. Wolfe said, "You stole your employer's clock." "Yes." "And you come to me with it." "Yes." "To prevent a murder?" She shook her head once. "To understand it, and to stop what I think may already be in motion." Wolfe glanced at the clock face as if he expected it to wink. "Miss Vane, I have no interest in a timepiece with mystical habits, nor do I involve myself in matters that are mere premonition. There must be an actual problem, grounded, in fact, requestable in clear terms. What do you want of me?" She met his eyes squarely. "I want you to tell me whether someone intends to kill Barton Klein, or whether Barton Klein intends to kill someone else." There was just enough quiet for Fritz's humming to drift faintly from the kitchen, the tune turning a corner into something cheerful. It had no business in the office. Wolfe said slowly, "Why do you think either of those things is true?" "Because I've seen him push people." Her hands clenched, relaxed. "In business, in private. If he wants something, he takes it. If someone is in his way, he removes them. He's removed people without killing them. But last Friday night I heard something different in his voice. It wasn't anger. It was pleasure." "And the guests?" She listed them. "Judith Attlee, lawyer, partner in Attlee and Grimes. She handles his acquisitions. Peter Harker, city councilman, one of Klein's friends, and Dr. Lionel Brogan, psychiatrist, Klein's therapist officially, though I didn't know they were close enough for dinner." "4 at the table," Wolfe said. "Mr. Klein, 3 guests, and you in attendance?" "Yes." And someone said, "The clock will tell." "Yes." Wolfe's fingers drummed once on the desk. It wasn't impatience. It was the sound of machinery engaging. "You have given me superstition, theft, and vague suspicion. I require more. What tangible event, what concrete fear, what result do you anticipate?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then said quietly, "His sister is coming back to New York tomorrow." "His sister?" "Eloise Klein. She's been in Switzerland for 2 years, mental health retreat they call it. She's not insane, she's just inconvenient." The word had contempt in it. "She owns 1/3 of the Klein estate. She's the only one with standing to challenge certain things Mr. Klein has done recently. I found that out from files I wasn't supposed to see." Wolfe said, "And you think she is the intended victim?" "I don't know. I think she is the reason either way." Miss Vane looked left at me and then back to Wolfe. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm not asking you to believe a haunted clock. I'm asking you to look at a man with power and a timetable and at a circle of people around him who don't all want the same thing. If the clock isn't magic, then it is a message. If it is a message, then someone is using it. And if someone is using it..." She let the sentence hang there like a noose. Wolfe regarded her for a long moment. "Why come to me?" "There are police." She gave a tiny shake of her head. "The police are for crimes that have happened. This is for one that may be planned. And Mr. Klein is very friendly with the police, when he wants to be." That last line had the tired finality of a person who had watched favors travel downhill for years. Wolfe leaned back slightly. "You are afraid?" "Yes." "Of what, precisely?" She looked at the clock again, and for a second I thought she might touch it. She didn't. "Of being right." Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits that meant something inside him had decided to take a bite. "You took this clock from a private house," he said. "You brought it to mine. You now place me in a position where its disappearance may be noted and traced. That is inconsiderate." "I'm sorry." "I am not." He lifted a hand, palm down, a gesture that pressed the air into order. "Nevertheless, I am intrigued." That word from Wolfe is not a firework. It's a switch turning. When he says intrigued, things begin to happen whether I want them to or not. He went on, "You will leave the clock here. I will ask questions. I will determine whether there is sufficient reality behind your apprehensions to justify my intervention. If so, I will accept the case." She blinked. On what terms? Such terms as I will state later if I accept it. Wolfe is a man who doesn't bargain in chapters. He bargains in final acts. Miss Vane exhaled through her nose as if she'd been holding her breath since Friday. Thank you. Not yet. I have not agreed. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, you will telephone Mr. Klein. I sat up. Cold. Warm. You will say I have his clock. Miss Vane stiffened. You can't. Watch me, Wolfe said calmly. I will not proceed in the shadows. If electrical mischief is intended, I prefer to place the wiring on my own board. Mr. Klein may be enraged. He may be alarmed. He may be indifferent. His reaction will be instructive. I grinned at Miss Vane. You picked the right house to walk into, sister. Wolfe ignored me. Call him now. I reached for the phone on the side table, because when Wolfe says now, he means before you swallow. Miss Vane said sharply, He'll come here. Perhaps. Then he will enter my office. That too will be instructive. I dialed information in my head without bothering to ask Miss Vane for the number. If you work around people like Barton Klein long enough, their personal line finds a way into your Rolodex, whether you want it to or not. I got his secretary, gave my name, and was connected in 30 seconds flat. Money moves fast. Klein's voice came on, smooth like expensive upholstery. Goodwin. Morning. Nero Wolfe wants a word. He says he has something of yours. Silence. Not Wolfe silence. Klein silence. It had metal under it. What? He said. A mantel clock, black mahogany, brass face, tiny crack in the glass at the 6. Ring any hall bells? A longer pause. Then softly. Where are you calling from? 35th Street. The brownstone? Another beat. Then, put Wolfe on. As I covered the mouthpiece and rose, I watched Wolfe's face. There was something on it I don't see often. Not satisfaction, not irritation. More like an old cat who has smelled fish from 3 rooms away and decided, yes, it is real. I handed Wolfe the receiver. He said very politely, Good morning, Mr. Klein. Your clock is in my office. If you would like it back, you had best come here at once. He listened. His expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked to Miss Vane. Then he said, I assure you I am not a man who collects petty trophies. I collect facts. I suggest you do the same. I will expect you within the hour. Click. Wolfe returned the phone to me like it was a completed chess move. Miss Vane looked like she'd been shown a cliff edge. What did he say? He said he was on his way, Wolfe replied. Archie, show Miss Vane to the front room. Offer her beer. I opened my mouth to protest the beer at 10:30 a.m., then shut it because I remembered Miss Vane had been living in a private fear since Friday night. Beer was a humane gesture by Wolfe's standards. Come on, I said to her. Fritz makes coffee that can revive the dead, but I'll take orders. As I took her out, Wolfe called after me. And Archie, before Mr. Klein arrives, examine the clock. Carefully. It was Wednesday by my calendar, but a Wolfe case doesn't care about calendars. It just cares about the smell of the first real clue. I looked down at that mahogany box on Wolfe's desk, the second hand frozen at a minute before 10. A clock that stopped politely, on schedule, 3 times in 3 years, right before someone hit the end of theirs. Yeah, that bell had my full attention. I left Miss Vane in the front room with a glass of beer she held like medicine, told Fritz to keep an eye on her but not to talk her into anything he couldn't pronounce, and went back to the office with the clock under my arm. Wolfe had taken his own advice about not moving by settling deeper into the red leather. His hands steepled, his eyes on me the way a man watches a waiter carrying soup. On the table, he said. I set the mantel clock on the side table near my desk, the one that had seen more corpses in photographs than any respectable piece of furniture should. Up close, it was better than handsome. The mahogany had that old, slow depth you get when wood's been polished by years of being dusted by someone who knows the difference between dusting and scrubbing. The brass bezel had a faint greenish tarnish in the grooves, not enough to be neglect, enough to be honest. The crack over the 6 was neat, radiating in 5 little arms, like a spider that had frozen mid-run. "Any ideas before I start poking?" I asked. "You will poke only with your eyes," Wolfe said. "We are still in the stage of avoiding stupidity." "Sure, I'll just stare it into confession." I lifted it carefully and turned it around. The back was a hinged panel with a small lock. No keyhole damage, no pry marks. I tried the latch. It was locked. I shook it lightly. No rattle besides the solid thump of the movement within. On the bottom, there was felt that had been replaced not too long ago, and 2 tiny brass screws that looked newer than the rest. I ran a fingertip over them. "Someone's been inside it," I said. "Almost certainly." Wolfe's tone suggested even a newborn should know that, but not necessarily recently. I set it down, leaned close to the face. The minute hand pointed between the 9 and 10, a hair past 9:47. The hour hand was nearly at 10. Second hand, dead on the 12. The brand name was faintly engraved at center, Halden and Rowe. Under that, in smaller letters, New York. "Not a cheap department store job," I muttered. "No, Mr. Klein's taste is not cheap, only vulgar." I gave Wolfe a look. "Vulgar clocks now? You sure you're not getting soft?" "Proceed." I did. There's a way to examine a thing without opening it. You look for what doesn't belong. I tilted the clock side to side, listening for unevenness. Nothing. I sniffed at the back seam, not perfume or cigar smoke, just the faint metallic scent of old springs and a whisper of polish. I looked for a maker's plate or serial number. It was probably inside. I tried the glass. The bezel was tight. The crack hadn't loosened it. The crack itself was old. The edges had a soft, smudged look, a tiny accumulation of dust in a couple of the radiating lines. That meant it probably hadn't been made Friday night, unless someone had a really fine hand and a vacuum cleaner. "Crack's older than last week," I said. "Good. One superstition eliminated. Miss Vane's loosest fact may be the clock's newest fiction." I frowned at the 6, where the crack centered. Centered right over the 6 like a target. If you were going to break a clock's glass by accident, you'd hit anywhere else. Unless you wished to mark the numeral. Or hide something behind it. I leaned closer, shifting my head so the overhead light struck the crack at different angles. A sliver of something caught it. Almost nothing, like a hairline shadow between the dial and the glass at the lower edge. I stood and went to my desk for a magnifier. When I came back and trained it at the base of the crack, I saw it clearly, a tiny wedge of dark material no bigger than a sesame seed, lodged between the dial face and the glass. It wasn't dust. It had a crisp edge. "Well, hello," I said. I glanced at Wolfe. "Looks like a stowaway. Can you remove it without opening the clock?" "Not unless I'm a magician," and I left my cape at the cleaner's. Wolfe's lips twitched a millimeter, which is him laughing out loud. "Then you will open it, but with care. There may be a mechanism intended to be disturbed." "Right. Clock booby-trapped too. Contradictions explode in my face. Nothing says classy like homicidal horology. I fetched a small roll of tools from the drawer, picks, a thin-bladed screwdriver, a pair of tweezers. I tried the lock again. It was a simple, warded lock. I slid in a pick and listened. 10 seconds later, it clicked. "Stupidity avoided," I said. "Do not celebrate prematurely," Wolfe told me. I swung the back open. The movement was clean and well kept. Brass plates, steel springs, a pendulum rod centered and steady. There was, however, a small modern addition bolted onto the left inner side. A thin metal bracket holding a coin-sized capsule, black, with 2 tiny wires running to a contact on the movement. I whistled softly. That's not Holden and Rowe. No. Wolfe leaned forward a fraction, eyes narrowing. Describe it accurately. Looks like some kind of switch or sensor. Modern, battery-powered maybe. Wires are new. Work is neat. Any identification? I angled it. There was a faint logo on the capsule. A stylized H inside a circle, with letters under it too small to read without pulling the thing out. Which I wasn't doing yet. Not sure, but it's an add-on. Somebody retrofitted the clock. To make it stop? Wolfe asked. Maybe to make it stop on cue. This could be a remote cutoff, or a timer, or a vibration trigger. I'm not an electrician, but I've seen similar gadgets and security systems. Wolfe settled back again as if the air had been rearranged to his liking. So the clock is not prophetic, it is instrumental. Or somebody wanted Miss Vane to think it is. Exactly. We were both looking at it when the doorbell rang. Wolfe's eyes lifted to the ceiling as if offended by architecture. Mr. Klein's punctuality is at least one redeeming habit. Archie, close the clock and place it on my desk. I did. I relocked the back, folded my tools away, and carried the clock to Wolfe's desk. The second hand stayed frozen at the 12, innocent as a saint that's been dead since Friday. The bell rang again, the second press longer, more imperious. Let him stew, I suggested. Maybe he'll boil into truth. Go, Wolfe said. I went to the door and opened it to Barton Klein himself. He was a tall man in his early 50s, built the way men are when they've had good tailoring and never had to run for a subway. His overcoat was camel hair, his scarf was silk, and his face had that smooth public polish that comes from shaking hands with voters and bankers while thinking about neither. If Miss Vane's word pleasure had seemed odd for his Friday voice, it wasn't odd now. His mouth curved faintly, not in humor but in control. Goodwin. He nodded once and started to step past me as if my foyer belonged to him by eminent domain. You can wipe your feet on the mat like everybody else, I said. Mr. Wolfe didn't invite the city council. He paused just long enough for annoyance to show and vanish. Where is he? In his office, and you can walk there under your own power. We don't carry developers. He looked at me, eyes cool. You enjoy this? I'm paid to. I led him down the hall. As we approached the office door, I heard Fritz in the kitchen stop humming. In this house, every note has ears. I opened the office door and announced Mr. Barton Klein. Klein entered like he'd done it 100 times and never been refused anything, then checked himself when he saw Wolfe unmoving behind the desk. For a second his gaze darted to the clock on the blotter, and I saw it. There, under the polish. A flicker of something tight and quick. Not surprise. Recognition. Wolfe watched him the way a botanist watches a new species that might be poisonous. Mr. Klein, Wolfe said pleasantly, you have come to reclaim your property. Before we discuss that, you will sit. Klein's nostrils flared slightly. He was used to giving orders, not receiving them. Still, he sat in the red chair opposite Wolfe, crossing one leg with a tidy economy. Now, Wolfe said, tell me why your clock has been modified with an electrical device. Klein's eyes moved to the clock, then back to Wolfe. If he was startled, he compressed it into a polite line. Modified? He said. I don't know what you're talking about. Wolfe's lids lowered. You will find it unprofitable to begin with a lie. I've examined the clock. It contains a modern electrical attachment. It is not original to its manufacture. Why is it there? Klein smiled faintly. It was the kind of smile that comes with a zoning variance. Mr. Wolfe, I haven't the faintest idea. It's a clock. It stops. It starts. If someone tinkered with it, they did it without my knowledge. And yet you recognized it instantly when you entered. Of course, it was in my hall. Not that. You recognized the modification, Your eyes went to it with... Wolfe paused a fraction, selecting a word with tweezers. Intent. Klein's chin lifted a hair. Your associate is imaginative. On the contrary, Mr. Goodwin is factual in small matters that betray large ones. Wolfe's voice stayed mild. How many people have access to your house? Klein leaned back as if settling into a deposition. Staff. 4 regulars. A housekeeper, cook, driver, and nightman. Occasional contractors, and my guests, obviously. Last Friday night there were 3 guests. Yes, he said it curtly now. Judith Attlee, Peter Harker, Lionel Brogan. Clara Vane was in attendance. Is that why you summoned me? To interrogate me about my social life? I summoned you because your clock left your premises and arrived in mine. That is already a matter requiring clarification. Wolfe gestured at the clock without touching it. A clock that has developed a reputation for stopping shortly before deaths. Has it? A muscle in Klein's cheek tightened and relaxed. People will mythologize anything. My late brother started that nonsense, I think. He liked to frighten children. Late brother, Wolfe echoed. How did he die? Klein's eyes narrowed. Where are you going, Wolfe? Answer the question. Daniel died of a stroke, in this house, 3 years ago. His voice had the flatness of a man who is used to the past being a prosecuting attorney. And the clock stopped beforehand. So Clara tells herself, Daniel was superstitious. He probably fiddled with it to dramatize his own mortality. Wolfe nodded slowly, as if filing it under plausible but unproven. And your wife? Klein's gaze sharpened. There was a flicker of actual heat. My wife is alive. Your other death, then. Your associate of a year ago, your spouse or partner. Miss Vane says the clock stopped shortly before her husband died. Clara's husband wasn't my concern. No, but the clock was in your hall that night too. Klein's mouth compressed. Yes, it was in the hall. It has been there for years. Then your clock has stopped on at least 3 occasions coinciding with deaths in your circle. On Friday it stopped again. Klein's fingers moved on his knee, a faint tapping, barely controlled. And you think that's my doing? Or Clara's? I think, Wolfe said, that someone uses the clock to communicate a threat, to create apprehension, or to establish an alibi. The electrical device suggests manipulation. Your denial of knowledge is unconvincing. Klein leaned forward. Let's be practical. Clara Vane stole the clock. If you expect me to ignore that because she tells you ghost stories, you're wrong. I want it back, and I'd be happy to forget this conversation if you return it now. Wolfe looked bored. It was the bored look that makes men like Klein sweat without knowing why. You're not in control here, Mr. Klein, and I'm not persuaded by your benevolence. You will answer more questions. My foot nudged the wastebasket because I felt like doing something with energy, and Wolfe had banned me from it. Klein's eyes flicked to me. No affection there, not even contempt. Just a cold inventory. A man who lists assets in people. Wolfe said, Why did you invite Dr. Brogan to dinner with Miss Attlee and Councilman Harker? Klein's eyebrows lifted. Because I wanted to. Not quite. Such a dinner is a council of war or a celebration. Which? A discussion. Of what? Klein exhaled. I don't have to explain my private affairs to you. You do if you want your clock back. That landed. Klein held Wolfe's stare for 2 seconds. Then his eyes moved away. It wasn't defeat. It was calculation. We discussed my sister, he said. Wolfe's head tilted a fraction. Eloise Klein. Klein nodded. She's returning to New York. There are legal and medical arrangements. Judith handles the legal, Lionel handles the medical, and Peter handles the political headaches. When you live in this city, you learn that each of those can be a different kind of ambulance. You expect difficulty from your sister, Wolfe said. A family member returning after a breakdown is rarely simple. Breakdown, Wolfe repeated. A convenient word. Was it a breakdown or was it rebellion? Klein's smile was thin. You have never met Eloise. She is delicate. Delicate people are often resilient. It is the brutal ones who shatter. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Your sister owns 1/3 of your estate. She has standing to challenge your recent actions. Klein's face went still. There was no open shock, but the polish dulled a shade. Clara has been talking. Clara is not in this room. You are. Wolfe's voice remained even. Why do you fear your sister's return? I don't fear it. Then why convene a lawyer, a psychiatrist, and a councilman at a private dinner on the eve of her arrival? Klein's jaw tightened. Because I'm responsible for her well-being. Ah, a noble motive. There was a beat of silence I could feel in my teeth. Then Klein said, Suppose I tell you we're arranging for Eloise to live quietly and safely, without interference. Suppose I tell you she's been unstable and that certain decisions must be made quickly. What then? Then I will ask who makes those decisions, Wolfe said. I do, as her brother and closest kin. Her physician? Dr. Brogan will assess her condition. If she is not fit to manage her affairs, guardianship will be renewed. Renewed, Wolfe said softly. It is already in effect. Yes, temporarily. And if she is fit? Klein shrugged, a small movement that meant a lot coming from a man who didn't waste motion. Then we'll proceed accordingly. Wolfe's eyes slid to the clock. Proceeding accordingly sometimes includes disposing of obstacles. Klein's stare hardened. Are you accusing me of intending to harm my sister? I'm not accusing you. I'm observing that your clock performs theatrically at moments of crisis. That is ridiculous. Perhaps. Yet someone at the dinner said, the clock will tell. Who? Klein blinked once. No one said that. Wolfe's voice stayed gentle. Another lie. Miss Vane heard it. She is credible in this because it alarmed her into theft. You did not summon her to your house to amuse her with nonsense. Someone said it. Think who. For the first time, Klein looked uncertain. Not frightened, irritated with memory. He pressed his fingers to his temple as though he could squeeze up a name. How should I know what Clara thought she heard? He snapped. Because it is your house and your dinner. Wolfe's patience didn't change, but the air did. It got denser. If you refuse cooperation, I will call Inspector Kramer and ask him to take custody of your clock and inquire into your Friday conference. Klein came up in his chair. You wouldn't. Wolfe regarded him. Try me. That's what Wolfe does. He takes a big man's certainty, holds it at arm's length, and lets it starve. Klein's breath hissed out, controlled. His eyes went to the clock again. The second time now, not of curiosity, but as if it were a witness with a nasty tongue. All right, he said. Brogan said it. He was speaking figuratively. About what? About timing. About waiting for Eloise's return to see what could be done legally. He asked if we should act before she arrived. I said no. He said the clock would tell, meaning time would tell. That's all. Wolfe nodded, as if he had expected exactly that and was only checking the box. Did your dinner include violence? Violence, Klein scoffed. There was an argument. Judith and Peter disagreed about the city's role. I may have raised my voice. No one was hurt. Did anyone fall? Klein hesitated, so quick it was almost not there, and then said, No. Another file opened in Wolfe's mind. I could see it by the way his eyes shifted, a slow inward turn. Wolfe said, Your clock remains here. Klein's head snapped up. What? I have not finished with it. You have no right to keep my property. I do when the property may be relevant to a prospective crime. This is extortion. No, it is prudence. If you wish to pursue legal remedies, you may call Miss Atlee. She will advise you whether you are wise. Wolfe leaned back, shutting down the avenue without raising his voice. Meanwhile, you will go home and reflect on the fact that your assistant is frightened enough to come to me." Klein stood in a single smooth movement. If Clara has grievances, she can bring them to me. She will not, because you terrify her. That is also illuminating. Klein's eyes flicked to me, then to Wolfe. "You're meddling in a family matter you don't understand." "Possibly," Wolfe said, "but I have an appetite for understanding." Klein's mouth opened, closed. He took his coat from the back of the chair as if he was restraining himself from grabbing the clock instead. "I will have it back," he said flatly. "Perhaps. Perhaps not." Wolfe lifted a hand, dismissing him with the grace of a monarch. "Good day, Mr. Klein." I escorted him to the hall. He walked fast, not running, but he might as well have been. At the door he stopped and turned to me. "Tell Clara," he said, voice low. "She has made a serious mistake." "I'll tell her," I said. "And I'll tell Mr. Wolfe." That sounded an awful lot like a threat. His eyes didn't blink. Interpret it however you like. Then he was gone, coattails snapping at the air like an insult. I closed the door and stood there a second. The house felt different now. It always does, after a man like that walks through it. Like you've let in cigar smoke and a lawsuit. Back in the office, Wolfe was still watching the clock. "Well," I said, "he's a ray of sunshine." Wolfe didn't look up. "He's a man in haste. That is more dangerous than a man in anger. Because haste makes mistakes? Because haste reveals priorities." His eyes finally lifted to me. "Bring Miss Vane here. At once. And Archie. Telephone Saul Panzer." I didn't ask why. With Wolfe, why is either obvious or a waste of breath. I went to the front room and found Miss Vane where I'd left her, on the edge of the chair with the beer halfway gone and her eyes fixed on a spot in the rug like she was waiting for it to confess. "He came," she asked before I opened my mouth. "He came, he glowered, he lied, he left without your clock. Wolfe wants you in the office." She stood too fast, then steadied herself and followed me back. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He nodded to her to sit. She did, hands folded so tight the gloves squeaked. Wolfe said, "Mr. Klein has been here. He is displeased." Her chin lifted. I expected that. "He is also afraid." She stared. "Afraid? Of what?" "That is what we will discover. For now, tell me everything you remember about Friday night. You omitted details earlier. You will not omit them now." She opened her mouth, shut it, then gave a short nod. "All right, dinner was at 7:30. The guests arrived around 7. I greeted them, took coats. Mr. Harker was jovial. Too jovial. Judith Atlee was crisp and annoyed about something before she'd even taken her hat off. Dr. Brogan seemed tired. He made a point of looking at the clock when he stepped in. "Looking at it how?" Wolfe asked. Like he was checking it, as if he expected it to be different. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Continue." "Dinner itself was normal enough. Mr. Klein played host. He can be charming when he wants to be, but it felt like performance." She hesitated. Toward the dessert course, Judith Atlee said Eloise was due in the morning and that there were papers to be signed as soon as she arrived. Mr. Harker said the city would cooperate if given proper framing. I don't know what that meant. Dr. Brogan didn't speak much. He mostly watched Mr. Klein. "Did anyone drink heavily?" Mr. Harker had 2 whiskeys before dinner. Mr. Klein had wine. Judith drank almost nothing. Dr. Brogan had 1 glass of wine. "After dinner they went to the study," I said. "You heard shouting." "Yes." Clara's voice tightened and she looked at her hands as if they might run away. I was clearing the table. The study door was shut, but I could hear them. Mr. Harker's voice got loud. Judith's voice got sharp. She said, "You can't railroad her this way." Mr. Klein said, "I can do anything I like." Then I heard the thump. "What thump?" Wolfe asked. "Like a chair knocked over or someone pushed into a sideboard. Something heavy." After that, there was silence for maybe 15 seconds. Then a laugh. Mr. Harker's, I think. He said, "For God's sake, Barton." And Judith said, "Stop it." Dr. Brogan said, "The clock will tell." And Mr. Klein said, "We don't have time for mercy." Wolfe's brows rose. "We don't have time for mercy." Yes, I remember that clearly. Did you see anyone after that? They came out around 8:45. Mr. Harker looked flushed. Judith was cold as ice. Dr. Brogan was pale. He went to the hall on his own. I saw him stop by the mantel and touch the clock just briefly, with 2 fingers. When I asked if he needed anything, he jumped as if I'd caught him stealing. I felt my own eyebrows do a small dance. Wolfe merely said, "Interesting," Clara went on. They left at 9:15. Mr. Klein walked them out. I stayed to straighten up. When I was leaving at 9:30, Mr. Klein was on the phone in the study. He sounded calm, but it was a hard calm. I passed the hall. I saw the clock stopped. I took it and left. Wolfe nodded slowly, absorbing. Dr. Brogan touched it. Yes. And reacted to your presence. Yes. Did you notice any other interaction with the clock earlier in the evening? Mr. Klein? Miss Atlee? No, not that I saw. Very well. Wolfe shifted his gaze to me. Archie, report your discovery. I gave Clara the short version. We opened the clock and found a modern electrical attachment wired into the movement. Somebody retrofitted it to control when it stops. Not magic. Engineering. Her face went blank a second. Then, so he lied. He knew. Either he knew, I said, or someone close enough to him to play with his furniture knew. Clara swallowed. That means the stops were staged, for my father and my husband too. Wolfe said, not necessarily by the same hand. But it means the clock is a tool. One may use a tool for more than one purpose. She looked up at him with a raw, sudden anger. Then someone has been playing with death to frighten me. Possibly, Wolfe said, unfazed, or to warn you, or to recruit you. Her eyes widened slightly. Recruit me? To what? I asked. Wolfe didn't answer. He was watching Clara, and I recognized the posture. He was testing her edges. Instead, he said, Miss Vane, are you loyal to Mr. Klein? She almost laughed. I've served him. That isn't loyalty. Are you loyal to his sister? I don't know her well, but I think she's been wronged. That is sufficient. Wolfe's eyes moved to the clock, then back. You will stay in this house today. You will not return to Mr. Klein's premises. If he telephones you, you will tell him nothing of our conversation. Will he telephone? Yes, Wolfe said flatly. He will want to know where his clock is, and he will want to know why you stole it. Clara's mouth tightened. He already knows why. He just thinks fear is a lever. Fear is always a lever, Wolfe said. The only question is who is holding it. I went to the phone. Wolfe had told me to call Saul Panzer, which meant he wanted eyes somewhere he couldn't send me fast enough. Saul is Wolfe's idea of mobility, thin, quiet, relentless, and possessed of a private record system that makes the FBI look like a grocery list. Saul answered on the second ring. Panzer. Saul, it's Archie. We've got a fresh stew on the stove. Need you to do a little shopping. Who, where, how much? That's Saul. No hello, no weather. I gave him the essentials. Barton Klein, Judith Atlee, Peter Harker, Dr. Lionel Brogan. Klein's sister Eloise arrives tomorrow morning. I need everything you can find on the 4, especially Brogan's background with Klein, Harker's ties, Atlee's legal angles. Quietly. Today. Anything else? Yeah. Find out who installed a gadget in a Holden and Rowe mantel clock. A pause I could hear him smiling through. That's a new one. If you find out it's from Mars, don't keep it to yourself. I'll call when I have something. I hung up. Wolfe was still with Clara. Tell me about Eloise Klein, he said. Clara's shoulders went rigid. I don't know much. I met her twice years ago. She was kind. She didn't like Barton. She questioned him. She said there were things he'd done with the family trust that weren't right. After that, she was unwell. She went to Switzerland. Barton told everyone it was her choice. It wasn't. Is she incompetent? No, she's sharp. She just gets overwhelmed. She feels things more than most people. Barton calls that weakness. And Dr. Brogan has been her psychiatrist. Yes, officially for both of them, but he's mainly Barton's man. Eloise never trusted him. That sat in the air a moment. Wolfe's eyes drifted half-closed, which means the gears were turning. Then the phone rang. I reached for it by reflex, but Wolfe lifted a hand. I will take it. He did so without hurry. Nero Wolfe speaking. I watched his face as he listened. A line appeared between his brows, then smoothed. He said, Indeed. At once? Very good. Send him in. He hung up. Clara's head came up. Who is it? Wolfe looked at me. Inspector Kramer is coming. He says there has been... He paused, and I felt my spine tighten in advance. An incident at Mr. Klein's house. Dr. Brogan is dead. By the time I got back to the brownstone that afternoon, the day had turned into one of those New York specials where the air feels like it's been chewed on by too many people. I'd followed Eloise Klein to West End Avenue, watched her walk into her apartment, flanked by Rudd and Vale like a diplomatic prisoner, and I'd kept myself out of sight because Wolfe had sent me to observe, not to audition for sainthood. Observation had paid. The apartment hadn't just been prepared. It had been rearranged. Not the big things, no new couch, no missing silver, the small things. A framed photograph on the mantel angled a hair away from the chair. A china figurine moved from the edge of a shelf to a safer spot. The kind of careful tidying you do when you're removing evidence that someone has been there before the owner arrives. Eloise noticed all of it in 2 minutes. She didn't cry or yell. She just stood in the middle of her living room, breathing slowly, and said to Rudd, calm as a judge, Tell Barton I will see him when I'm ready. If he sends anyone else into my home without my consent, I will have them arrested. Rudd and Vale didn't like it, but they swallowed it. They left her there with a single hired nurse, young, polite, watchful. I stuck around long enough to see Eloise sit at her desk and take out a notebook as if her mind had been waiting for a quiet chair. Then I headed back to Wolfe to report. I was halfway through my summary when the doorbell rang, and Fritz appeared to say Mr. Saul Panzer was in the hall. That meant he'd arrived wearing news like a coat. We convened in the office, Wolfe anchored behind the desk, me in my usual chair, Clara Vane pale and rigid on the red one, and Saul perched to my left looking like he'd never wasted a calorie in his life. Saul said, The device in the clock is a Holden and Rowe retrofit kit for remote stopping. Not their product, aftermarket. Sold by a firm called Emerson Controls. I traced recent purchases. Who bought one? I asked. Saul's eyes flicked to Wolfe. Judith Attlee. Purchased 3 months ago through her office. Billed as consulting equipment. She signed for it. Clara made that same not-a-word sound as earlier, only smaller. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. Saul continued, Emerson kits come with a handheld transmitter. I didn't get the transmitter, but I did get a technician who installed one at Klein's request 2 years ago. He says he was hired by Dr. Brogan, paid in cash. Brogan told him it was for therapeutic suggestion. Wolfe said softly, Therapeutic suggestion. Saul nodded. The tech remembers because it was odd. He also says the control unit can be wired to halt the movement at a preset time or on remote press. I whistled. So Attlee buys the kit. Brogan hires the installer. Klein ends up with a respectable haunted clock and a staff member who's terrified of it. Exactly, Wolfe said. Thank you, Saul. If Inspector Kramer wants elaboration, you will provide it. Saul rose. Sure. He looked at me. Try not to get stepped on." "I got good shoes," I said. He left. Wolfe turned to Clara. "Miss Vane, Dr. Brogan did not merely attend a dinner. He was a Confederate. He helped create your superstition." She stared at Wolfe as if he'd removed the room's floor. "Why would he do that?" "To serve Mr. Klein's interests," Wolfe said. "Or Miss Attley's. Or both. We will clarify." "What interests?" she demanded, her voice fraying. Wolfe didn't answer her directly. Instead, he picked up the phone. "Archie," he said, "call Mr. Klein. Tell him his sister and his lawyer and Councilman Harker are to come here at 7. Add that Inspector Kramer will also attend. If he objects, inform him that objections are a form of cooperation." I did it. Klein's voice was clipped, and when I mentioned Eloise and Attley and Harker, his breathing changed. He said, "I'll be there," as if arriving was the price of breathing. Kramer didn't object either, not when Wolfe told him we had evidence tying Attley to the clock mechanism and Brogan to its installation. The inspector's only comment was, "Don't start without me," which for Kramer is a love note. By 7, the office was full in that tidy, airless way Wolfe likes when he's about to do surgery with words. Barton Klein arrived first, jaw tight and face set in bored outrage. He sat at the far end of the red chair as if he didn't want to contaminate it. Judith Attley came in next, a tall, angular woman in charcoal suit and pearl earrings that looked like they'd never met a laugh. Her eyes took in Wolfe, me, Clara, and the arrangement of chairs. She sat without being told, folding her hands like a person prepared to sign something unpleasant. Peter Harker followed, rubbing his hands as if the room were cold. He was smaller than Klein, round-faced, with the practiced openness of a man who has never met a camera he didn't like. He gave a genial nod around, then looked uncertain where to place his body and chose a chair nearest the door. Polite panic. Eloise Klein arrived with Kramer, and that pairing alone told you half the story. She had called the police herself the moment she left her apartment, not to accuse anyone but to guarantee a witness. She walked in steady, her eyes bright and tired at once, and when she saw her brother, they held for a second too long and then moved away. Clara sat rigid in her chair, clinging to herself like a coat. Kramer took his usual spot by the door, big and immovable, with Stebbins behind him and a notebook open. He looked at the suspects and said like a referee, "All right, Wolfe, let's hear your song." Wolfe looked at each face in turn, slow enough to make them feel examined. "Today," he began, 3 events occurred in sequence. First, a clock stopped. Second, a psychiatrist died. Third, a woman returned to New York and discovered her home had been discreetly violated. These are not coincidences. They are parts of a strategy. Harker tried to smile. "Wolfe, you talk like we're in a thriller." "We are," Wolfe said with mild contempt, "but an intellectual one. The clock in Mr. Klein's hall is not magical. It is mechanical. It has been fitted with a remote halting device. That device was purchased by Miss Attley." He nodded toward her. "Mr. Panzer confirmed it." Attley's face didn't flicker. If she was surprised, she stored it in a safe deposit box. Wolfe continued, "The device was installed not by a clockmaker, but by a technician hired and paid by Dr. Brogan. He described it as an aid to therapeutic suggestion." Brogan's name made Eloise's throat tighten. She didn't speak. Wolfe said, "Miss Vane has twice before experienced the clock stopping shortly before a death in her family. That was no prophecy. It was conditioning, a superstition planted in her mind to make her pliable, afraid, dependent." He glanced at Clara. "When the clock stopped, she became ready to believe it meant doom. That belief could be used to direct her behavior." Clara's lips parted. You mean they made me think it was cursed?" "They made you think you were warned," Wolfe corrected, "and warnings can be steered." Klein's head snapped around. "Judith? What the hell is he saying?" Attley turned her head slowly. "I'm waiting." As am I, Wolfe said. Let us proceed to motive. He leaned back slightly like a conductor drawing breath. Mr. Klein, he said, has an urgent financial undertaking, a redevelopment package tied to the Klein Family Trust. It requires all principal beneficiaries to sign. One beneficiary is his sister, Eloise. Eloise's eyes hardened. Klein didn't look at her. Wolfe went on. Miss Atlee is Mr. Klein's lawyer. Councilman Harker is his political sponsor. Dr. Brogan, though a psychiatrist, was also a gatekeeper of Eloise's legal competence. If Eloise is declared unfit, guardianship continues and Mr. Klein may sign on her behalf. Convenient, yes? Atlee said nothing. Harker shifted in his chair as if the cushion had sprouted nails. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Friday night's dinner was a final alignment. Miss Atlee urged speed. Councilman Harker urged the city's cooperation. Dr. Brogan urged waiting to see what the clock would tell. By that he meant waiting for a controlled moment to evaluate Eloise on arrival, under conditions they selected. Eloise said coolly, under Barton's conditions. Precisely, Wolfe said, but Dr. Brogan changed his mind. Harker's mouth opened. Atlee's eyes sharpened. Finally a flicker. Wolfe spoke gently. I infer this, Miss Atlee, because Dr. Brogan returned to Mr. Klein's house after midnight. He did so alone, not because he desired conviviality, but because he intended to speak privately. He had observed you all in conference. He knew the plan, and he, being a physician, not a lawyer, found enough conscience to balk. Klein snarled. You don't know that. I do. Wolfe tapped the blotter once. Because your 2 men at LaGuardia attempted to bring Eloise directly to your house. When she refused, they told her of Dr. Brogan's death, and they were displeased. That attempt was prearranged. Dr. Brogan's role in it was to assess Eloise immediately, under pressure, perhaps medicated, perhaps surrounded, so that a declaration of incompetence could be obtained quickly. Atlee said flatly, Speculation. Not at all. Wolfe's eyes rested on her. Your purchase of the clock kit is fact. Dr. Brogan's hiring of the installer is fact. The attempt to control Eloise's arrival is fact. The only remaining question is who killed Dr. Brogan when he threatened to undo the arrangement. Kramer grunted. Yeah, that's my question too. Wolfe inclined his head. Then observe the sequence. The clock stopped at 9:47 Friday. Miss Vane stole it. By removing it, she removed a tool. That tool was scheduled to be used again very soon, perhaps at Eloise's arrival, perhaps at a later meeting to frighten or corner Miss Vane. Its disappearance forced the strategist to adjust. Dr. Brogan, who had helped plant the superstition, realized at once that the situation was unstable. He returned to Mr. Klein's house that night to renegotiate or to confess. Klein's stare was killing Frost. And you say I killed him? Wolfe looked at him as if Klein were a chair that had spoken out of turn. If you had, Mr. Klein, you would not have telephoned Inspector Kramer yourself. You would have arranged discovery by a servant. You are brutal, perhaps, but not stupid. Klein flushed a dangerous red. Wolfe turned to Atlee. Miss Atlee, however, had more at stake. If Dr. Brogan withdrew, you lost your medical liver. If Eloise arrived free and unpressured, guardianship might fail. The redevelopment deal would stall. Your fee and your influence would diminish. Moreover, Dr. Brogan had knowledge of the clock device, of your purchase, and of earlier uses of fear. He could implicate you. Atlee's voice was still thin and crisp. You're building a story because you dislike me. No, Wolfe said, because you are the only one whose actions require murder. Harker burst out. That's not fair. Be quiet, Kramer said. Wolfe went on. You visited Mr. Klein late last night. You were expected. He called you after Dr. Brogan phoned. You arrived while Mr. Klein took a call. You found Dr. Brogan in the study. You argued. He threatened to expose the plan. You struck him from behind. perhaps with the paperweight on the desk. He fell, his skull met the table edge, and he died. Atlee's face had gone a shade paler, but her voice didn't waver. You have no proof? Wolfe nodded toward Kramer. Inspector, did your men find a bruise at the back of Dr. Brogan's neck? Kramer said, Yeah. And did they find, in Miss Atlee's handbag, a Holden and Rowe remote transmitter? Atlee stiffened. Her eyes snapped to Kramer. Kramer's jaw worked. We did. Panzer tipped us after talking to you. We didn't announce it because I wanted to see what you'd do with it here. Atlee's mouth opened with a lawyer's instinct to speak, but the room had no air for it. Wolfe finished softly. You controlled the clock to discipline Miss Vane's fear and to coordinate your pressure. When the clock was stolen, you lost that control. Dr. Brogan's conscience became your next obstacle. You removed it, then you tried to reassert control through Mr. Klein's men at the airport, but Eloise resisted. That resistance, too, you will now find inconvenient. Atlee's eyes moved slowly around the room, landing on Eloise last. A long beat passed where her pride fought her options. Then she said quietly, He was going to ruin everything. Kramer stepped forward. That's enough. Eloise whispered. Lionel was protecting me. Atlee didn't look at her. He was protecting himself. After Friday, he wanted out. He wanted to tell you he'd helped keep you away. People don't get to do that without consequences. Klein launched out of his chair. You did this in my house? Kramer grabbed his arm. Sit down, Klein. I want her disbarred and buried. You'll get in line, Kramer said. Atlee's shoulders sagged a fraction, like a rope finally cut. I didn't plan to kill him. I planned to keep him quiet until Eloise signed. He made a speech about morality. He turned to leave. She swallowed once. I couldn't let him. Harker looked like a man who has just found his own name on a subpoena. Judith. Jesus! Save it, Kramer said, clapping cuffs on her wrists. You can testify your friendship to the judge. While Stebbins read her rights and Kramer guided her toward the hall, the room let out a collective breath. Even Wolfe's shoulders seemed to drop a millimeter, which counts as a yoga class for him. Eloise stood, straight as a blade. Barton, she said, voice low, you used a clock to frighten your own assistant and a doctor to cage your sister. I don't know if that makes you a criminal, but it makes you my enemy. She turned to Kramer. Inspector, I want a lawyer who is not Judith Atlee, and I want a full accounting of the trust. Kramer nodded. You'll get it. Klein's face had gone waxy. He tried to speak, found no words, and settled for hatred. Eloise didn't take it personally. She just walked out with a calm that I envied. Harker made a cowardly move toward the door. Wolfe said, Councilman, remain. You are not arrested, but you are revealed. Leave now, and I will send Mr. Panzer to the newspapers. Harker froze. I didn't kill anyone. No, Wolfe said. You merely helped plan to strip a woman of her autonomy. That is not murder, but it is a kind of theft. Consider that as you return to your office. Harker's face folded. He muttered something about misunderstanding and fled. That left Klein, Clara, Wolfe, and me. Klein looked at Wolfe with pure venom. You think you've won? I have achieved clarity, Wolfe replied. Winning is a childish word. Klein turned on Clara. You, after all I did for you. Clara rose, shaking but upright. You did it for yourself, and you let her do it to me, because fear kept me useful. She looked like she might cry, and then didn't. I resign, Mr. Klein. He stared at her as if she'd slapped him. Then he stormed out, too proud to run and too angry to stay. Silence returned, the real brownstone kind, as if the house itself exhaled in relief. Clara looked at Wolfe. So my father and my husband. Wolfe's gaze softened. Not much, but enough to notice. I cannot prove their deaths were engineered, but I can prove your fear was. You are free of that now. She nodded slowly, like a person trying on freedom for size. When she left, Fritz appeared with dinner as if the world had never done anything but circle toward food. Wolfe waited until the trays were set, then looked at me. "Archie," he said, "what is the moral?" I chewed on it a second because I knew he wasn't asking for a quip. People who think time belongs to them forget it belongs to everybody. Wolfe's mouth curved almost imperceptibly. Close. Time belongs to no one, but fear is always owned by the one who cultivates it. Miss Atlee cultivated fear as a gardener cultivates orchids, patiently, artfully, and without compassion for the plant's pain. In the end, she was strangled by her own vine. He lifted his napkin. "Come. Dinner is a more reliable clock than any I've seen today." I sat down, and the brownstone settled around us like a familiar coat. Outside, New York kept rushing to its appointments, its deals, its panics. Inside, the only ticking that mattered was the quiet rhythm of forks and Wolfe's appetite reclaiming the house.